All right, welcome everybody. I'm glad to have you here. My name is Claudia, and I am one of the founders and the immediate past chair is my official title of the Independent Museum Professionals Group. And so you are here probably because you want to learn more about what we do and who we are. So this session is meant to give you that insight, a little bit of that insight. I'm not sure that we're going to have answers, but as I said, we are going to try to give you some suggestions and thoughts and insights, and we'll take it from there. The structure that we planned is each of us there are 6 of us, each of us doing a quick 5-minute introduction with a couple of points in it. The points are a quick recap of how we got to be independent museum professionals, a challenge that we face as an independent museum professional, a success that we're proud of, and what we see as the current landscape. So we're going to each have 5 minutes to do that. I'm going to be the time monger and be really strict. And then I know there's a few misconceptions out there about independent museum professionals. We want to try and bust those myths. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the rest of the time is your all for questions. So I think that's how we're going to proceed. We're going to get started. I am going to go first, but then I am going to do this. I decided early this morning that I was going to do it in reverse alphabetical order. So my panelists, you all need to figure out where you fit in. No, I'm going to call you out, but Kheli gets to go first this time. I know you probably usually are last, so I figured, I'm going to start backwards.
I am forever last as a W. Kheli for the win.
Kheli for the win. So you'll go next. I'm going to go first, but you'll go next, just to set the stage. So here's my 5 minutes. How I got to be an IMP. I lost my full-time museum job in 2009 during that, recession or whatever you want to call that time that we had. While I went into consulting thinking it was temporary and that I was going to find that amazing next full-time job in a museum, but I found out I liked it. It fit the life that I was having at the time with family and everything else. And I had been working in museum since I had been working museums about 20 years at that point, and I found that I had enough contacts that I could sustain myself, and I had sample projects, and I had the confidence to market myself, and so I made it my full-time gig. A challenge that I face as an independent museum professional, for me, that's managing my finances, billing, insurance, like those kind of office-y things are, my company is growing and taking on bigger projects, and it's just been harder for me to kind of get that piece under control. So that's a challenge. I saw your note, Beth. Yes, I will add that in. A success that I'm proud of is I worked with a small museum in New Jersey to completely reinterpret their site to tell a previously untold or a hidden story, I should say, and it has changed the museum completely, how the community perceives them, how they work with the community, 180 degrees, all for the better on everybody's part, and that was so satisfying. Currently, the landscape for IMPs, I think that there's a niche that for everybody's skill set. But I'm not sure that everybody who wants to be an IMP will be able to do it full time and make enough money to, sustain yourself. So I think that part of the current landscape involves taking on another job, maybe not in the museum field, but that'll help you pay the bills. If you can only consult part-time, I think that's part of where we are at this point in time. Okay, so that was my piece. To fill in the question that Beth had, which was great about what is our specialty. I see myself as an audience advocate. So I work on consulting in 4 areas: education, evaluation, exhibition, research and writing, and accessibility. I try to combine all those things to think about how the museum is perceived by the audience. Okay. Passing it on, the baton goes over to Kheli.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I am Kheli Willetts, and I'm the founder and principal of Dira Professional Development, and my work is grounded in governance, leadership, eh, cohort coaching, and programming, which also includes community engagement strategies, all of which are done through a lens of DIA and equitable partnership and collaboration. Okay, so how I became an IMP. Well, I left my job. My last job was at a regional. I used to be a former professor. The longest story of it is that I decided to be polyamorous in my museum work. I can't think of another way. There was nothing more frustrating for me than having my job tell me why I couldn't work with a particular institution because they were too small or too rural or it ranged, and that made me unhappy. I also have a really short attention span, and I thought, wow, this will work. So that's how I decided to become an IMP. The challenge that I face is working efficiently. And I don't mean when I sit down to work. What I mean is making sure that when I'm meeting with a potential client that I don't spend so much time on it, because it's like really bad dating when they decided they don't want to date you anymore. You've done all this work. Like I went and bought a whole outfit and got my hair done. Like that equivalent. That's not efficient. So trying to figure out how to be efficient, because many times I don't necessarily think that our clients understand how much prep work and involved in actually having a conversation about maybe potentially working with you sometime in the near future. Like I can't get that time back in my life. So I'm trying to think of strategies for myself and a way to do that. A success that I'm particularly proud of, I was brought on to be a grants contract manager. And by the time I was done with my conversation, particularly related to equitable grant making in particular, as well as DIA, they changed the entire scope of the whole call. They had to redo it, which was great. And we ended up creating an advisory, almost like a parallel advisory panel full of all people of color led organizations to provide insight. So it was no longer doing to, but doing with. So I was super proud and still super proud of that. And then the last thing, I have a single word about the current state of IMPs is opportunity. I think it's limitless opportunity. We just have to figure out how to hear one another and talk with one another. And, we're literally in a field. I know this is like 4.5 minutes. We're literally in a field that you need us because something is not going the way that you think, which is fascinating because who wants to admit that something's wrong? And so that's the first step. So we can get into it, but that's what I'm saying. There's plenty of opportunity. We just need our peers and our institutions to be a little bit more vulnerable because we're here to help. Okay,
Thank you
I'm
so
not
much,
passing it
Kheli.
because I didn't read
No,
everybody's
no.
last name. Okay, great.
I got it.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Kheli. Rachel R. We have two Rachels, as you can see. So Rachel R., you are up next.
Yes. Hi, I'm Rachel Ropeik. And for any of you who are on the beginning, I was like, I'm going to share one slide. And I've decided I'm not going to share one slide because I don't want to put up a slide on the screen because I would rather see, faces and at least the sense of who's here. So I am, my kind of area of specialty is I refer to myself on my business cards and my website and everything as an educator, an adventurer, a facilitator, an experience builder, and a pirate. And I kind of very intentionally am not trying to pigeonhole what I do too much. How I got here is I worked mostly in art museums, mostly in education roles for about 20 years. I worked in a lot of the big museums in New York. I worked at the Met and MoMA and the Brooklyn Museum and the Guggenheim. And I worked in London for a couple of years. And then I moved out of New York City to Aspen, Colorado to be the head of education at the Aspen Art Museum in February of 2020. So whole bunch of reasons why that didn't work out, and I will be diplomatic about not going too far into them. But let's just say I resigned from that job at the end of 2020. And so at that point, it was that was kind of the start of my IMP journey. which was kind of a way for me to stay connected to the museum field and working in the museum field, which I love very much, but without getting too sucked into the minutia of one museum. So I would say all of this is kind of connected to a challenge that I face because I am trying not to pigeonhole what I do. You know, I'm not saying like I'm an exhibit designer, I am a curriculum writer, you know, that kind of thing. A challenge that I face is sort of how to talk to people about the range of things that I can do, because part of what I wanted to be an IMP is to not have to sort of shave off all these different areas of interest and expertise. A success that I'm proud of is in my practice, I have kind of two arms of what I do, which is, again, kind of intentional, but through a challenge, which is that I do work with museums, which I love, but I also do work on my own, I offer my own retreats, and I have an online membership community and workshops. And so I'm really proud of being able to have kind of the bandwidth for both of those things. And that is helping me kind of keep it a little more sustainable and manageable. And I guess for the landscape of IMPs question, I guess connected to sort of what Kheli said, I think because there are an increasing number of folks going independent in the field, I would say that it is sometimes, from my perspective, the folks who are already independent who are ready to think outside the box a little more than the institutions may be. So I think there's some kind of like growing pains or learning to be done about museums recognizing like, oh, this is actually a place that we could use some help. Maybe it's not a staff position or a department title, but that I think is a prime spot for IMPs to come and help. Okay, that's me.
Thanks, Rachel R. So next, we are going to go to Uma.
Thank you, Claudia. Hi, everyone. My name is Uma Nair, and I am an operations strategist. It's a little different from, you may not have heard that phrase in museum field, so let me just explain what that means. So my work with museums primarily focuses on improving how the museum works internally, whether it's streamlining team capacity or project planning, or even things like making sure all your department airtables, talk to each other. I don't know if you have that problem, maybe not, but yeah. I'm generally hired by museum managers and leaders when they want to see their staff spend more time doing the things that they were hired to do, rather than spending all their time on like administrative tasks and processes and things, slow processes. So my work is very internally focused, and I believe that unless you fix internal challenges that a lot of museums are facing, you really can't serve your external audiences. So that's kind of my philosophy. My foray into the IMP world comes after spending almost 10 years in working in museums in different capacities. So I've led digital projects, I've led content projects, I've been a communication specialist, I've been a volunteer manager assistant. And my most recent job was at the Getty, where I spent 7 years, and I led digital exhibitions for the Getty. Before that, I worked in tech. I was at Google for 8 years, where I set up and managed teams, quality assurance teams across the world. The short answer to why I became independent and had to like jump off of the employee wagon is because I needed more flexibility in life and less burnout. And I'm a mom to a teenage boy, so that's a lot of fun too. Yes, but the main reason is that throughout my career, what I've enjoyed doing the most is problem solving and finding those gaps and setting up tools and processes and training people to like take them over and then moving on to the next problem. So I love change. So that's why it naturally made sense that I became an IMP. So I'm a very newly minted IMP. I think I've just been doing this for 1.5 years now, and I love doing that. A challenge that I face is and I think everything that I'm going to say is very like my work specific, because I'm still trying to find my footing and all of that, but it's a lot of fun. The challenge that I face is working in isolation a little bit, but then it really helps to be a part of cohorts like this. The IMP group is fabulous. I learn every day from each one of them. So that's there, but then it's also isolation, and because how isolation affects the work that you do, everything takes that much longer because you're trying to do everything by yourself. And especially with the kind of work that I do, there needs to be a kind of a project management mindset. Like there is a skill set and a mindset that's needed, which is not, taught in like the humanities or the liberal arts. So it's a little difficult for me. It's not difficult, but everything just takes longer. So that's a big challenge for me. A success that I'm proud of is my last project was with a publications department of a major museum, and I was able to help them implement a very structured, brand new method of working that reduced burnout for that team. So the team was working over capacity by 520%. And I was able to bring that down to a much more sensible and humane 85%. I love numbers. I love data. So 85%, and then they could use the rest of the time to like do things like career development and leadership development, things like that. So it took a lot of work because it was hard. It is really hard in this field, I think, to change the way people have been working, the set ways, and especially with everything going digital, it's very hard to make that change happen. So that's something that I'm proud of. And the landscape for IMPs, like I said, I'm pretty brand new, so it looks like there is a lot of opportunity, and especially with the kind of work that I'm doing, I feel like, I mean, ideally speaking, I should be out of a job in about a few years if everybody is like, trained and like it's able to manage their internal processes and everything. I hope that happens. I really hope that happens because it's so important. But I think yes, like everyone said earlier, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also like a lot of isolation, and definitely not something that, as Claudia said, it's not something that we can just rely on to make a living by itself. So gotta be very clear and honest about that. That's all.
Thank you. Fantastic. So Rachel G., you are up next.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Gibson, and my pronouns are she, her. They're not on my name, so I wanted to make sure I said that out loud. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Also, I'm sorry that it probably looks like I'm in a cave, where the great thing about being independent is you can work from wherever, and where I'm at today is kind of cave-like. So I have like as much light on my face as possible, so I hope you can see me. But what I do, I like to think of myself as a museum educator's educator. So what I do, so my background is very specifically in museum education, mostly working with children, some adult audiences, but think like field trips, family tours, scout groups. That's sort of my lane. And my journey to independent work was kind of a slow burn. I come from the history field, so my background is in public history, and I've always worked with small, like mid-sized museums at the biggest. So, and I'm also in the Southeast, so it's a lot of small history museums. That's who I like. Those are my colleagues. And over the years, well, let me say this. I really believe that museum education can change the world. Like, that's my soapbox. I really believe that is true. And it makes me sad when I see museum educators burning out, because I love the research. I love the literature. I love the studies. But I also know that when you're actually doing museum education, you don't have time to go into all of that. And so over the years, what I found that I loved the most of all the parts of my job was doing professional development for my colleagues and training my staff. And that part of my job just made me come alive. And about a year ago, some things happened, like those are all my internal motivations. The external motivations were things going on in my institution and things going on in my family. And for like a whole bunch of reasons that all sort of collided at the same time, it was the right time for me to just quit my job and pursue the part of museum work that I love the most, which is professional development. So I do some projects for museums. I've done a few, but what I love to do and what I'm gonna answer your questions in the opposite order. So what I love the most and what I'm the most proud of is the professional development that I do with museum education, especially with small museums who work a lot with volunteers, or like retired teachers, and maybe they know how to do some things, but they don't know how to do everything in the museum, in the museum sense. So that's what I love to do, and I'm the most proud of that. The challenge is convincing, and I think one of the other panelists mentioned this, convincing the museums that a small investment on their part will give them a huge ROI. Like a huge part of this work is hustle to sell your potential customer, your potential client, on the benefit of what you have to offer, when a lot of museums, especially small museums, are used to bootstrapping it. So that's the biggest challenge. So very, 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 very happy with what I'm doing, but also a little bit broke. So that's kind of like, that's sort of the way it goes, I think. But I do think that the potential is, I think sometimes we think that museum consultants are project-based and they work hourly and they do these huge projects and they operate on referrals, but that's not really the model that I've adopted. And I think that the landscape maybe is changing. I think the ease of internet and the ease of communication just makes it where, whatever you can imagine, you can do. So I think the opportunity, I'm going to echo the answer that I think it was maybe Kheli said, opportunity is out there. And I think that is true.
Thank you so much, Rachel. All right. Rita, last but not least, because even though you have a D, we went backwards.
That's okay. That's fine with me. I'd like to think you saved the best to last. Okay, maybe. Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, we're all different. This has been fascinating. I've been writing notes. I've been changing everything I was going to say because this has been so informative, and I love that we're informing each other. So learning, right? This is all about lifelong learning. So I'm Rita Deedrick, and Deedrick Consulting is my little company here in Central Ohio. I'm based in Central Ohio. I have several local clients, but I also work remotely, and I have some clients around the country. So it's been great. My specialty is visitor studies writ large, but my favorite thing is evaluation of all kinds of things, and especially program evaluation and program development through an evaluative lens. And I love it. I love what I do. I love what I do. So how is it that I came to be doing this as an independent? So well, for one thing, I am not an emerging professional. I entered this field 30 years ago, and through education. And I think it was Rachel G who's like, yes, educators, that's my thing. I thought I was going to be a classroom teacher. And I stumbled into this whole non-formal learning world, and I knew I had found my home. And I, in fact, worked for the same informal learning environment for 26 years. I have a certain stick-with-itness, and I really thought I would retire from there. However, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic had different ideas for all of us in the world. And I'm grateful for how I came through it physically and mentally, but I did lose my job. My museum closed for many months, longer than most places, and laid off almost everyone. And then the callbacks were odd. We all thought it would be temporary, a month or two or three or four. And after a year, I made a decision and I resigned, and which was really tough because I'd been there for a long time, and decided to go independent. And even though the circumstances really pushed me to do something I didn't think I wanted, I have to say that at this point in time, I feel very good about the decision, and I love where I am right now. So challenges, I'm going to talk about the challenges. So a couple of things. I have a lot of challenges, but they're not insurmountable. I mean, this is life, right? So for one thing, for me, because of how I came into this, it was letting go. And I think it was Rachel R. that talked about, or somebody talked about, like having a lot of different, connections to different institutions. And while that has been great, I was so loyal, to the same place for so long. I had to let that go, to a certain extent. Now, actually working with them on a project that started yesterday, so I didn't let go too much, but that was really hard. I mean, it's just, it's still emotional, and I can get a little weepy about it because I was a department head and I miss my people. And that brings the other challenge, which for me was reestablishing relationships. So I was pretty well connected in the community, right? And in fact, a lot of my work, it's been, word of mouth. I mean, people know me, but establishing those relationships as an independent and not attached to my former employer, I had to be very intentional about it, and I had to work at it, and I still am. So that's one of the challenges. I also wanted to say another challenge while we're on that is what Kheli was saying, is this notion of efficiency, because for me, work seems to be feast or famine. I'll have some times where there's not a lot going on at a moment and I feel antsy about that, but then a lot happens. And during those times where it's not very busy, what happened to my efficiency? I used to be able to do so much in a day, and now it's like, oh, I got 2 things to do, and it's overwhelming. But I'm getting a little bit more used to that. I will balance that then with successes. So as a person who does a lot of things, but I love program evaluation. I've been working with a local client who's been able to get a grant from a funder year after year and make a little niche for me on the evaluation. And probably the highlight of my week, this just happened a couple of days ago, is they're getting ready to do the next grant proposal. They actually did talk to me before they submitted the proposal this time. And I rushed my final evaluation report to them so that it could inform the proposal. And not only did it do that, they're attaching it as an addendum to the proposal. And I was like, oh, this is like every evaluator's dream. So, but I have other examples. Thank you for the glitter. Other examples of that. Landscape wise, I have a weird perspective, I think, because I was this reluctant independent. And I am also, for the last 3 years, have been doing some volunteer work with a group called museumexpert.org. Some of you may know of them. And so I've had a lot of exposure to a lot of museum people over 3 years, many of whom lost their jobs, many of whom are having difficulty finding their niche. And the fact is, working in museums, it's always been hard, and it's hard in a different way right now. And it's hard in a way that is scary and upsetting. And so what I think I see are people who want to become independent museum professionals because they're tired of being in the museums themselves. And I both want to encourage that and be cautious about that, because I think to be an independent, even though I came into it in this really weird way, what I have learned is you got to be grounded in your intentionality. What are you doing and why are you doing it? You've got to feel good about it. And whether it's forever or whether it's until that great job does come along in another few months, you've got to be really intentional about it. So that's something I'm seeing in the landscape. Certainly there's a lot of opportunity, but opportunity may not be a good thing if you aren't well grounded. So that's my story.
All right, thank you all. That was like, you all like stuck to the time and everything. I'm really impressed. Thank you. So the next piece that we were going to talk about was this myth busting. And there were 2 misconceptions that were pointed out to me, but maybe there's more. And so we can discuss that in the part that follows, which is the Q&A. One thing that I heard in the rumor pipeline about independent museum professionals is that we are competition at small and mid-sized museums for full-time staff, and that they're hiring IMPs to work instead of EMPs. So I'm going to open it up to the panel and tell us what you think about that, and and why that's not necessarily true.
I'll start. Oh, I'm sorry.
Great. No, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, from the perspective of someone who worked, I also was a longtime loyal person as well, Rita. I worked for my institution for over 16 years before I finally left. And it was a small, mid-sized museum. And there was a perception actually that consultants were so much more expensive that there was no way we could afford them. But IMPs were a lower entry point salary, which is also not a great thing either. But that was, I mean, from the perspective of my executive director and the board that I worked for so long, that was sort of their thinking. They were always going to be more willing to hire someone fresh out of school than to seek out consultants because of the perception that they could get more for less money with EMPs. I don't know that that's a good thing, but that is not like it's sort of best
kind of the opposite of what we were talking about. Okay. All right. Uma, you were gonna weigh in.
I mean, I was just I would love to like find out more about why that misconception is prevalent, especially coming from like a more like operational standpoint. I would love to know like what is it that they think is, you know, it's better to hire I mean, if IMPs are being hired more than EMPs. And I don't think it is possible to like get something done in a museum solely through an IMP or solely, I mean, yes, an employee, yes, and you know, definitely for sure. But solely through an IMP, it can happen, but I think it is less likely to happen. So what my perception is that find out what is the bottleneck, what is happening there that, you know, requires somebody to hire an IMP. Again, hopefully that doesn't, you know, that solving that problem doesn't like make us lose our jobs. But I think there is still a lot of opportunity for collaboration and certain types of activities and tasks being done by either of these that can make the museum function much more efficiently and smoothly. So that I would love to learn more about that, like research more about it.
And I would say, adding on to that, Uma, I think some of the places that have hired me as an IMP have been, where it's been sort of, if it's been like in the place of an employee, it's mostly been, for example, like if they're going through a hiring process. So I have come in for like a short term. This wasn't necessarily an EMP that was being hired, but you know, I've had a couple of museums that I've talked to about sort of stepping in on a kind of like part-time interim basis for a few months while the hiring process goes through. And then like the end of my time would be when the new person is hired. So I think that's also one of the ways that if there's a call for trying to hire a consultant, it may also be about trying to cover some work. Because I mean, hiring, if any of you have ever been in the position to hire anyone, I don't know, but it is very time consuming and a lot of work. And so it's hard to kind of like do your work and hire for another position, which is empty and no one's doing that work, right? So sometimes I've also been an IMP who's kind of like stepped in to fill that gap.
Rita, I think you wanted to add.
Yeah, I actually thought that I'm going to say there are some grains of truth to that notion of we're competing with full-time employees, but that doesn't mean it's the truth. So I think there might be moments, but it's what happens in the long run. And so I think everyone so far has said that, and I'll give you one example of a project that I had been working on. In fact, it just ended for almost a 2-year project where I was there as an evaluator on a funded project, even though they had an in-house evaluator. But I was able to come in and do capacity building with their team and the in-house evaluator. So I was a boost to the notion of employment. And in fact, now they are creating a new evaluation position at this particular museum. So I feel very good about that even though I kind of filled that role for a year or two, that it actually in turn created something new. I have another client locally that actually is not museum work. It's very interesting how things kind of branch out, but this is an organization that is just trying so hard to get on their feet, and they cannot hire full-time or even part-time now for what they need, but they know I can fill it. And so I'm doing that for 6 months until they can get on their feet, and they will be able to create a position at some point. So I think we have a really interesting niche. There are moments where, yeah, that maybe they could have been, promoting somebody in that position or hiring new, but we help stabilize things and build the capacity so that they can do that.
Kheli, I see your hand up.
Actually, I was going to say it's a little bit about what Rita's saying, but almost contrary to what you are saying. I have a client where, I consult largely on operations and a little bit of leadership coaching. But what ended up happening as a natural evolution is once a week, I meet with their 3 of their museum staff who are all, for the most part, EMPs. The CEO actually calls me their union rep. That's the running joke. I'm their union rep because because what I have, outside of being a college professor, I was executive director for almost 15 years. And that was before this regional where I decided to be polyamorous with my arts and culture work. But this CEO didn't see his competition. They saw the opportunity. So I spent a great deal of my time talking with them about how to do their job and not the work that they're hired for. It's largely about interpersonal relationships. So, you have the seasoned folks who've been there forever that this is the way it always happens. And then you have an emerging professional go, yeah, but that's not what the field says. And how do I get them to talk to each other? So I spend a lot of time listening to stories, occasionally some tears, a bit of cursing. But the great thing is that what could have been an adversarial relationship potentially, right? Because all of this, they spend their whole time telling me like largely what's wrong. And then I spend the time going, try this. Now let's talk about the work you're doing and also like just giving support. But what happens is that it's the quiet work, not their ability to do their job, not the stuff that they went to school for. It's how to work in that environment, which there is no class for that. And we act like that's not something in itself. Working in museums in particular, or nonprofits, arts nonprofits. So I don't know if there's anyone else that's like me doing that work in nature, but that's where the opportunity is.
Interesting. So the second actually leads pretty nicely into the next question, or the next myth that I heard, which is that we have never worked in a museum before, or we don't have museum backgrounds. Now, I think many of us have worked in museums before. I think almost on this panel, I think all of us have worked in museums before, full-time and or part-time. But then having a museum background, I just wondered if people wanted to speak to that a little bit. I'm not saying there aren't consultants out there that haven't worked in museums before. There probably are some who are trying to break in and do that, but the majority that I have encountered is in my years as an IMP, we are museum people. We have worked in a museum before, but let's hear what you all have to say. So who wants to take that on first?
I mean, I'll take it.
Go for it, Kheli.
I have a master's in museum studies. I mean, I'm a whole museum person and museum education, side note, because that's the gang I rep. And I worked in a number of museums of various sizes. And my peers, I actually haven't met someone who hasn't done work as a regular employee in a museum. I haven't. Save marketing and communications people. Okay. I wouldn't even say it for development, but when it comes to marketing communications, they spent some time in the field and maybe came from the field first. That's the only position exception I would say I've experienced for the most part.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you. All right. Anybody else want to? Uma, yeah.
Yeah, I think I just want to chime in. That's exactly what Kheli said. Like what I've seen is that people who could come from other fields mainly are people from the marketing and communications field, which is how I got into museum. So I just wanted to jump in and say that amongst everyone here, I'm probably the one with, you know, the one that question it really applies to, like, did she really work in a museum? Because I was in tech for a very long time. But what I have found, I moved to the museum field because I love the arts and culture and conservation stuff. But I don't think it's very easy to understand the nuances of this industry unless you're part of it for a solid amount of time. And you're able to build those connections and those relationships and the ways of working and learn the ways of working. I would have never thought of being an IMP after my first 2 years of being of 2 years of making this career shift or working in a museum. So I do think there is immense valuable experience that comes with having worked for a solid amount of time in a museum before you go out as an independent.
And one thing that I think that is also like both what Kheli and Uma just said is making me think about is, and like I'm thinking about this both from the hat of like when I was working inside a museum and outside folks were hired, and now I'm the outside folks who are getting hired. But thinking about, I try to approach a lot of my work in general and life from an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. And I think that's very hard in museums, especially when so many of us are used to the kind of like bootstrap nonprofit, like we have 3 pennies, let's get this whole project done. Larger societal problems we don't have time to get into. But I think one thing that I have really tried both inside and outside to think about is if there is, and I agree, mostly I don't actually encounter folks who have no museum experience being hired to work in museums. But I will say sometimes like if folks are being hired as an outsider to consult with museums or even as a full-time staff, frankly, I try to really think about like, well, what are they bringing that may be necessary for maybe it is time, like someone was saying up in the chat, it's like maybe it's time for a change on something, right? Maybe they are bringing, if it's a museum that has not really like, brought its marketing and communications up to date, maybe hiring somebody who's got a marketing and communications background that is not only based in museums is actually a really good move. So I think just like trying to also kind of bring that, like give people the benefit of the doubt, even if they may not have the background that I have or that I would expect someone to have.
I'll just add on to that maybe another in addition to marketing and communications, finance people I have seen be brought in, I mean, not like auditing, but like finance consulting. But other than that, if it's when you think like there's like nonprofit business work, and then there's like the museum work, which is like interpretation, education, exhibit, collections, conservation, like that kind of stuff. I've never met anyone who didn't have like professional in the museum experience consulting on that. So I think maybe it might be like the difference between like the business side of things and the culture, for lack of a better term, side of things.
Well, that's a good distinction to make because there are some operations that require some kind of a business sense or business aspect that I know was not the focus of my studies because I was focusing on the things that I wanted to focus on, dealing with the people and the objects and the connection between the two. So all right. So I wonder if anybody has any other questions. I mean, this is your time now, with the time that we have left, to ask us. I mean, we're here, so we want to try to help you in any way we can. So if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat. You can just so that I can keep track of people. If you want to raise your hand or something, just so that we don't, we try to get to everybody in an orderly manner. That would be great. So this is the part where you all talk. And we be quiet we're quiet for a little bit.
if it's okay, I'll go ahead and just ask my question here.
Please go for it.
How do you guys go about networking and finding your clients? Do you find often that they find you? Do you have to go to conferences and find them? I'm really curious about how that process works.
Yes to all of that. Oh,
I was going to say all of the above.
I was going to say yes to all of that. Although one of my current clients was ear hustling a conversation I was having with somebody else. And they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "Did I hear you say?" And I was like, "Well, yes." And then we had a conversation. It is all of the above. I never miss an opportunity to tell people what I do, because you have no idea what people actually do, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, even if I'm at a restaurant and someone's like, somehow it comes up, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. And then they're like, "Oh, my sister." And then here we go. Like, you have no idea. So the whole point is that you're always talking about what you do, because guess what? When you don't work, you don't make money. So, and that's not to say people with regular straight gigs are like making money and not working, allegedly. I'm not saying that at all, allegedly. But I'm saying this is very real. Like, if you literally don't work, you literally will not get a check. So it's all of them, for sure.
Uma, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add in because I think the newest IMP here. But yes, all of the above. And I feel last year was the first time I went to the AAM conference, for example, and I made so many connections. I mean, Claudia, like so many people that I met, incredible people. And it was just amazing to just learn and listen and get their business cards and share mine and then come back and just keep that contact going. And definitely also reach back to all your contacts you've made in your in your museum studies course, or at the place that you worked. But it's mainly through like word of mouth and networking and all of that. So there is a network that needs to just get made, and it's a lovely place to be at. Almost like, I don't think I've encountered anyone who hasn't like been willing to help. So, so that's it's really nice.
I would add to that also that don't underestimate the power of a website, because there are so many people who, what's the first thing they do? They go to Google and say museum consultant, and you want to pop up. So put your website together. Don't just rely on social media is great. Definitely use it, but don't just rely on that. So Tara, go ahead. Yeah.
Having said that, I do not have a website. But, well, so my thing is I'd rather have no website than a bad one. And I just haven't had the bandwidth to put something together that I'll keep up.
Fair enough.
So I've seen so many bad ones. So that's my 2 cents. And I've been lucky because I had so many connections. I was able to, in reestablishing those relationships, really leveraging those. And I think to what Uma was just saying is that it's fascinating. There's almost like a flywheel moment where it's like, there's this one thing, and then there's this one thing that didn't work out. But next thing I know, they invited me to bid on a different project. And then that happened, and then that happened. And then suddenly it does start to happen. So even though it can feel very slow, yeah, somebody said, don't underestimate the casual chats. I am not a master networker, and it has been amazing when I look back at the trail in just 3 years of what has happened and one thing has led to another. So yeah.
Tara, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Hello, and hi, Rita. And hi, everyone. I'm like a budding museum professional. I finished my master's in heritage interpretation in December, and I decided to start like full-time, aiming to be a visitor studies consultant in January. And so yeah, and I have actually 2 questions, but I don't know if we'll have time. Also, I'm very sorry I was late. There was a series of events, so I will also watch the recording and let me know if this is like something that came up earlier. But I'm wondering like how much to badger folks. Like, I've sent out my first kind of round of kind of cold calls or cold emails, and I was giving people kind of 2 or 3 weeks, a little longer over spring break to get back. And I don't mind networking. I don't mind reaching out to people. I just don't want to burn a bridge. So that question sort of like, how much do you push and how much do you just let it wait? And then the other thing is, how do you plan for leave, like sick leave or parental leave, or like not little things, but like the big things? I'm in my early 30s and I may take a parental leave at some point. I may need a lengthy sick leave. Yeah, those are the two.
I have thoughts on both, Tara. I think first up, I was just in another circle, another network that I'm part of, where we were talking about like exactly this kind of like launching and pitching. And every single person said they felt more awkward about it from the side of the person marketing themselves than they ever responded to someone else's marketing with annoyance. So I think it's like one person was like did a post about like how many, you know, messages do you think I sent about this new program I'm offering? And everyone was like, oh, like 2 to 3. And she was like, I said 45. Right. So I think it's like keeping in mind that like maybe it's not always like a direct email again, but like, do you want to post on LinkedIn? Do you want to use other social media? Do you have a blog? Do you want to be on, you know, some guest post on some other website? Like what other channels you can do with that nudging? But I think like keeping your voice in there is exactly what I try to do, and I would not get overly in your head. Especially somebody else in that meeting was like, a CEO named John is not worried about badgering you. So it was also kind of like remembering that like at least for those of us like me who are like coded femme or female, that may be more of an internalized thing. And then the other thing that you were talking about leave, I actually just started working with like a financial advisor to help plan for that kind of like feast and famine idea. I do have a separate business account, which I just set up last year. And so he has kind of like helped me think about like big picture, like how do I put money aside so that like if I need to have time where I'm not working, or if just like projects don't come in, I have some cushion. So I would think that's my one thought, was like sort of thinking about financially, like doing whatever you can to protect yourself for those eventualities.
And don't be afraid. I was just going to say, don't be afraid to ask for help on that, because as I mentioned earlier, financial stuff is not my thing. But maybe if you can't, you're saying, oh, I can't afford a financial planner right now. You see if you could barter. Like, is there a way that somebody, you could do something for them so that you could get the advice that you need, and you give them something really cool in return, like a cake or I don't know, something else, that babysit their children or something like that.
I'm going to put a link in the chat. I'm working with this financial advisor for free because I started like through this amazing like collective. So
I also want to mention, sorry, that I'm muted. That your local county will always have small business help, people who are there who can talk about finances and stuff. And the other thing I wanted to add was in terms of parental leave and things, I plan out, maybe also because I'm like a project management psycho, I plan out my year looking at my son's, like, I plan out vacations, I plan out holidays, all of that, and then buffer in time for any project that I take up with a client. I buffer in, like, this is going to take 30 to 50% at least more time than what I'm actually planning for. So I think it's important. You'll get the hang of that as you start working with people. So just wanted to add that.
And there's a question in the chat. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say real quick that sometimes like the financial pressure will overcome the hesitancy that you have to keep pitching yourself. Like when you know you need to get paid, it's a lot easier to put yourself out there. So sometimes those two things go hand in hand.
I know there are a couple questions, but I do want to say one more thing. And sometimes this is a little bit of a marathon, meaning you contact and like, we'll get back to you. I literally have been having a dance with one client in particular since last June. And in fact, right around the holidays, they took me out for cookies to say, we still want to work with you. Like, we're just trying to figure out a couple more things. I don't want you to think that we don't want to work with you. It's going to be fine. And I was, and again, I have shirts that I have worn less than I have had conversations with them trying to get them to move along. So again, it's just you have to really sort of just be patient. They don't even notice that the time passes. You do, because that's a job and that's money. They actually don't. They're just trying to make sure the boxes that or the list that they've created, they're at a point where they're ready for you to come in. So if it seems quiet, just don't immediately give up. Like, give it one more time, or just space it out. A nice little holiday card. And then all of a sudden they'd be like, that's right, we were supposed to get back to Tara. You'd be surprised what falls off people's radar.
Timing is everything, definitely. Timing plays into it a lot. I want to get to the question in the chat about international clients. And there's a couple of people that are asking about that. And so the business financial aspect of doing work abroad, I think that's a question for talking to a professional about that. I know even within the US, there were some tax things in another state that I had to take care of, and filing my business in another state and that kind of thing. So just please, yes, protect yourself. Definitely.
And on the other side of that, like, I've done some speaking for international folks, and I mean, other than like the taxes being taken out differently before they got transferred to me, there actually wasn't that much that was any different. So I think it really depends on the gig and the client.
Another question that's here about working with small museums in low-income communities, and does your consulting differ from an established museum? So Rachel, I see that you answered that. I basically, the philosophy that I go by is I have two rates. I have my full price, or I have free. So if there's somebody that needs my help, and I feel like a kinship, or I want to do that project and they can't afford my full rate, then I will give them I will do it pro bono. I have done in my, 15 years now, this is my 15th year of consulting. I have done 2 pro bono jobs, because everybody's been able to pay me. I haven't turned any down. There were 2 that said, well, we can't afford you, but we really want to work with you. And so those were the 2 pro bono. I look at it as it devalues you when you change your pricing. Again, that's how I approach it. So I'm open to talking to people about how to make it work.
Actually, Claudia, I have a third one. I have the full rate in pro bono, but the third one is if you were starting something from scratch. So I've had a couple of people say, I'd like to start a foundation, or I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit. That's actually, that my rate actually increases, because you don't have anything for me to look at. Like, it's literally creating work from the very beginning with someone who has no idea how these things work. But I say that initially, I just, I'll say this is my range, which it's like a $50 window. And then I say that, for original work, because you don't have any foundation, it starts at the top end. This is what we do. Now, if we come back later on future projects, it wouldn't be the top end, but it is absolutely the top end. So
there you go. That's good. There's lots of different ways to approach this. And I think that's the key with being an independent, is you get to make the rules, which is a really cool part of our job. I see we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I think I see Rachel put in the chat that she's happy to speak with other people, with people. I'm going to volunteer myself as well. If anybody wants to talk, I think all of our info is published somewhere, but I really feel like I hope we gave you some baseline grounding in being an IMP, and that we're really nice people. And I hope you'll continue to seek us out and talk to us, and we would love to hear more from you too. Anybody else want to add anything to that in my panelists before we let everybody go? All right. Peace, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.